You don't need another explanation. You already know what it feels like to begin again. You know the sting of excitement that slowly turns to frustration. You know the voice in your head that says, this time will be different, only to whisper weeks later, maybe it's not meant to be. It's a cycle, familiar, exhausting, and quietly soul-crushing. You get started with enthusiasm, you put in effort, maybe even see a glimpse of progress, then something slips. Life gets in the way, discipline falters, doubt creeps in. Before you even realize what's happening, the momentum is gone, the excuses return, and you're right back at the start, again and again and again. This is not because you're broken. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack talent or intelligence. It's something deeper, more invisible, a silent loop running in your mind. You've conditioned yourself to believe that starting over is a normal part of growth, but it isn't. Growth demands commitment, and commitment demands that you keep going long after the feeling that started it has faded. The truth is, most people are trapped in a loop of starting, not finishing. They've made the beginning feel comfortable, almost exciting. But the middle, the boring, difficult, uncertain middle, is where people vanish. The middle is where dreams go to die quietly. What no one tells you is that every time you quit and restart, you lose something more than time. You lose belief in yourself. You lose credibility with your own mind. You chip away at the trust that is supposed to drive your forward motion. It's not just about failing a task. It's about failing to prove to yourself that your word means something. Because when you say you'll do it and don't, the mind remembers. It doesn't forget. It stores the broken promises. And over time, your identity shifts from someone who follows through to someone who gives up when it gets hard. That's why it feels heavier every time you restart. You're not just pushing through the task, you're fighting your own disbelief. Starting over repeatedly also conditions you to expect failure. You no longer begin with the expectation to finish. You begin expecting the fall. You already feel it creeping in, waiting around the corner. That energy contaminates the process before it even has a chance to take root. You don't approach your goals with power. You tiptoe around them with hesitation. Your start becomes half-hearted because deep down you don't fully believe this time will be different. That's the real reason progress feels impossible. It's not the plan, it's not the effort. It's the underlying belief that has been worn down by your own inconsistency. But here's what changes everything when you realize that the pain of starting over is not external, it's internal. It's the result of ignoring what you know you should do. It's the pain of not living up to your own potential. No one punishes you when you quit. The world doesn't stop. Life moves on. But inside, something erodes, something precious, something that once gave you fire. And unless you interrupt that erosion, you'll wake up one day numb to your own dreams, going through the motions, convincing yourself that maybe it just wasn't meant for me. But it is meant for you. The vision you saw in your mind, the one you once felt so strongly about, that wasn't a coincidence. That was a signal, a glimpse of what could be, if only you'd hold on long enough. The answer is not in starting stronger. It's in refusing to stop. The solution is not in another reset. It's in rising again without letting go of the rope. Every time you fall, stand. But don't go back to zero. Don't erase the progress. Don't romanticize the restart. The path forward is already underneath your feet. You don't need a new beginning. You need a new level of resolve. Starting over might feel familiar, but it's not your destiny. Finishing is. The reason most people keep starting over isn't because they don't want success. It's because they've been taught to depend on something too unreliable to carry them through. Motivation. The world constantly pushes the idea that you need to feel inspired to take action, that you should wait until you're ready or until the mood strikes. But motivation is emotional fuel, and like all emotions, it comes and goes. It rises when the vision is exciting, when the path seems easy, and when the outcome looks near. But when the road gets hard, when results slow down, and when the excitement fades, as it always does, motivation vanishes, and all that's left is discomfort. That's when most people pause, or worse, quit. And then, after a while, they wait for a new burst of motivation to strike, and they start all over again, repeating the exact same cycle with a different goal, a new habit, or a changed strategy, thinking this time will be different. But nothing truly changes because they're still anchored to the same unreliable energy source. Motivation was never meant to sustain you. It was never meant to be the engine. It's just the ignition. The real power doesn't come from how good you feel. It comes from how committed you are, even when you feel nothing at all. That's the edge most people never cross. They stay addicted to the emotional high of starting. But starting is easy. Starting is exciting. It gives you the illusion of movement, the illusion of growth. The hard part, the part that builds character, is what happens on the days you don't feel like showing up. The days when no one is watching, when there's no applause, no visible reward, and no encouragement. That's the space where growth is earned. That's the moment your future is decided, not by how motivated you feel, but by how disciplined you choose to be. The truth is, you don't need more motivation. You need to stop making your feelings the compass of your actions. You need to make a decision that your goals matter, even when you don't feel like chasing them. Because when motivation fades, and it always does, discipline has to take over. Discipline is the quiet force that gets up when it's tired, works when it's uninspired, and keeps moving when everything in your body says stop. That's how consistency is built. That's how cycles are broken. That's how you stop starting over, by no longer letting feelings vote on your future. There's a reason you've gotten close to breakthroughs and still found yourself walking away. It's not laziness. It's not a lack of time or resources. It's something more subtle and far more dangerous. It's self-sabotage. It hides in hesitation and delay and second-guessing and excuses that sound reasonable. You begin with determination, but as progress demands more of you, a quiet resistance surfaces. Not loud enough to scare you, just enough to stall you. You say, I'll start fresh next week. You say, this probably isn't the right time, but deep down, something in you knows those are just polished lies dressed up as logic. Self-sabotage doesn't come with warning signs. It's silent, it's soft, and it's effective. It doesn't need to convince you to quit. It just needs to convince you to wait. And where does it come from? It comes from a lack of alignment between your self-image and your goals. You might want to succeed, but if you don't see yourself as someone worthy of finishing, your subconscious will always pull you back. You'll chase the outcome while running from the identity that would sustain it. That's why, no matter how many times you restart, you keep collapsing at the same stage. You haven't yet upgraded your internal standard. You're still acting like the person who gives up, but hoping for the results of someone who never does. That contradiction creates mental tension, and that tension turns into fear. Fear that you'll be exposed. Fear that you'll fail publicly. Fear that if you really try and still don't succeed, it'll prove something is wrong with you. So instead, you sabotage it quietly before the world sees. You play it safe by quitting early. You keep your potential untested so it never has the chance to be proven wrong. But what you don't realize is that every time you stop yourself from finishing, you're teaching your mind not to trust your own ambition. You're feeding the belief that starting is okay, but finishing is somehow dangerous. Over time, that belief becomes your identity. You stop aiming high because aiming high feels like setting yourself up for pain. So you choose comfort over challenge. And comfort never transforms you. It sedates you. Self-sabotage is not a habit you break in one day. It's a mindset you confront every single time it shows up. And it will show up. But this time, when it whispers that you should slow down, pause, or retreat, you'll recognize it for what it is, a thief. A thief of time, of potential, and of the greatness you haven't even begun to tap into. You can't hold on to your vision if you haven't defined it. You can't build momentum toward a future that's still vague in your own mind. This is where most people unknowingly sabotage themselves. They never stop long enough to get clear. They say they want more, but when asked more of what, their answer is uncertain. They want success, but can't describe what success would look like, feel like, or require of them. They want freedom, but haven't defined what freedom means. And without clarity, your mind has no direction. It wanders. It experiments. It drifts toward comfort instead of results. You chase everything and end up catching nothing. That's not because you're not capable. It's because your target keeps changing. Clarity is not optional. It's the foundation of consistent progress. It eliminates confusion. It eliminates second-guessing. When you are absolutely clear about what you want, why you want it, you stop entertaining distractions. You stop needing external validation. You stop waking up wondering if you're on the right path, because the path is already written in your mind. Without that internal blueprint, everything becomes reactive. You spend your energy responding to life instead of creating your own path through it. You start over not because your goal was impossible, but because it was undefined. A goal you can't picture will always be a goal you can't reach. The truth is, clarity is power. It sharpens your decisions. It filters your focus. It makes it obvious what you should say yes to and what must be cut out completely. When you're clear, your brain stops negotiating with distractions. It stops tolerating anything that doesn't serve the mission. You no longer wake up with vague intentions. You wake up with purpose. You no longer chase motivation. You chase precision. And from that precision comes power, real power, not hype, not wishful thinking, but the kind of steady, focused energy that moves mountains over time. If you've been stuck in a loop of restarts, take a step back and ask yourself this: what exactly am I trying to build? Can I define it with detail? Can I describe what success would look like in my life, not just to others, but to me? Because until your vision becomes specific, your steps will remain scattered. You won't stop starting over by working harder. You'll stop by thinking clearer. The more precise your goal, the less room you leave for hesitation. And hesitation is the doorway through which failure always enters. You don't need more interest in your goals. You need obsession, the kind of obsession that doesn't let you sleep until you've made progress, or the kind that turns distraction into disgust and replaces excuses with execution. Interest is soft. Interest is polite. Interest disappears when the journey gets uncomfortable. But burning desire, that's a different force entirely. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't stop for feelings, opinions, or circumstances. Burning desire becomes the fire in your bones that makes giving up feel like suffocation. And until you develop that fire, you will always be at the mercy of external pressure. You'll always be looking for motivation, always needing reminders, always restarting. You have to understand this truth. Burning desire is not something you wait to feel. It's something you build. It grows by constantly reminding yourself why you started. It strengthens every time you imagine the life you could have if you just kept going. You feed that desire by choosing the pain of growth over the comfort of settling. Most people never finish what they start because they never wanted it badly enough. Or they thought desire was something that just happens naturally. But the truth is, desire is a discipline. It's forged in silence, in solitude, in those long hours where no one else is watching but you. It's not pretty. It's not always inspiring, but it's powerful beyond measure. This is the line that separates those who dabble from those who dominate. Dabblers flirt with goals. They dip their toes in, back away when it burns, and come back when it's convenient. But those with desire, they immerse themselves in the fire. They learn to live in discomfort. They stop asking, how long will this take? And instead ask, how far can I go? They don't see quitting as an option, not because they're fearless, but because they've made a decision that nothing will pull them away from the pursuit. They might bend, but they don't break. The reason you keep starting over is because you haven't yet made that kind of commitment. You've wanted things, you've been excited, you've even been disciplined for a time. But excitement fades. Only burning desire keeps going when there's no applause, no reward, no immediate result. When you choose to develop that kind of desire, you don't need another fresh start. You become unstoppable. You don't need to restart. You become the fire that keeps burning until the mission is complete. If you want to stop starting over, you must begin by mastering your environment, not just your physical space, but your mental and emotional surroundings. People think discipline is built through willpower alone, but willpower is temporary. It burns out fast in a toxic environment. You can have all the right intentions, but if your daily surroundings are full of distractions, temptations, and subtle negativity, you will always be fighting an uphill battle. The truth is, your environment either feeds your focus or fractures it. It either pushes you toward discipline or pulls you back into the cycle of inconsistency. And if you're not intentional about shaping it, it will shape you. You have to start making your environment reflect your goals. That means eliminating anything that contradicts your path. That might be clutter on your desk. That might be people who drain your energy. That might be habits that look harmless but steal hours of your day. Every item in your space, every voice in your ear, and every thought you entertain is either helping you or hurting you. There is no neutral ground. If you surround yourself with people who settle, you'll unconsciously settle. If you let your phone decide your focus, you'll spend your day chasing noise instead of pursuing mastery. That's not weakness, that's programming. And the only way to rewrite it is by taking control of what you allow around you. Even your language, what you say to yourself, how you talk about your goals, matters. Words are not harmless. They are instructions to the brain. When you say, "I'll try," you've already given yourself permission to fail. When you say, "I hope," you've traded certainty for wishful thinking. But when you speak in terms of decisions, when you say, "I will," or "I don't negotiate with excuses," you shift the identity you live from. And when that identity becomes clear, your environment must follow suit. You start cutting things off, not out of anger, but out of alignment. You no longer keep things in your life just because they've always been there. You keep what serves the mission. You remove what distracts from it. Simple, ruthless, necessary. Because if your environment is designed for mediocrity, you'll keep restarting no matter how hard you try. But if it's engineered for growth, if it reflects your future, not your past, then every day you show up becomes easier. Not because life gets easier, but because you've finally stopped working against yourself. You've created alignment, and alignment removes resistance. No one rises above the level of their standards. That's why some people never finish what they start, because they never raise the standard of what they will and will not tolerate from themselves. They tolerate inconsistency. They tolerate excuses that sound intelligent. They tolerate low effort and call it being realistic. And as long as you tolerate something, you will never change it. You will return to it. You will defend it. You will normalize it. Most people don't fail because they aim too high. They fail because they accepted too little from themselves for too long. If you want to stop starting over, you have to stop negotiating your standards every time life applies pressure. Standards are not goals. Goals are what you hope to achieve. Standards are what you refuse to live without. They are the lines you draw in the sand. And if you've been starting and stopping, failing to follow through, constantly explaining your delays to yourself, then it's time to look in the mirror and ask, what have I allowed? Because what you allow becomes your pattern, and your pattern becomes your identity. You might say you want greatness, but if you constantly settle for comfort, then your actions are casting a vote for mediocrity. Greatness doesn't come from talent alone. It's the result of refusing to fall below a certain level, ever. You must set a standard that makes quitting unacceptable, that makes laziness unbearable, that makes wasted time feel like a personal betrayal. And it doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Real standards are quiet. They show up in small choices, the decision to get up when it's hard, to finish what you promised, to keep going even when no one is watching. That's the battlefield where your future is decided, not in one giant leap, but in your private refusal to back down. When you raise your standards, everything around you has to adjust. Your language changes. Your actions sharpen. Your mindset hardens. You stop being impressed by temporary motivation and start demanding long-term consistency. You stop needing permission. You stop explaining why things didn't work out. You become the type of person who simply doesn't break the promises they make to themselves. That shift is what ends the cycle of starting over. Because the person with high standards may fall, but they never fall back to zero. They don't start again. They continue. And that's the difference between finishing once and failing forever. The gap between who you are and who you want to become is built on one thing: decisions. Not feelings, not intentions, not dreams, just decisions. Every day you are choosing to move closer to your future or closer to your past. And the reason people keep starting over is because they treat decisions like suggestions. They commit when it's convenient, they act when it's easy. But true transformation doesn't come from easy decisions. It comes from relentless ones. Decisions made when you're tired, when you're discouraged, when nothing around you looks like progress. Those are the choices that define the trajectory of your life. You cannot escape the truth that your life today is the result of every decision you've made up until this moment. You either decided to push forward or to wait. You either decided to be consistent or to make excuses. You either decided to face discomfort or to delay it. There's no neutrality here. Every delay was a decision. Every restart was a consequence of what you chose or refused to choose. That may sound harsh, but it's liberating. Because if your choices created the pattern, then your choices can break the pattern. You are never stuck. You're just one decision away from a different path, but only if that decision is final. There's a kind of decision that eliminates every other option. It's not fueled by hype. It doesn't depend on mood. It's a deep internal resolve that says, I will not live like this anymore. That moment changes everything. It hardens your will. It focuses your energy. It silences distractions, and it replaces the urge to quit with a deep responsibility to finish. Most people never make that kind of decision. They linger in indecision, dabble in action, and wonder why nothing changes. They don't fail because they're weak. They fail because they keep negotiating. And every negotiation with your old self is a door back to who you used to be. If you're tired of repeating the same cycle, don't ask what needs to change around you. Ask what needs to change within you. Have you truly decided? Have you closed the back door? Have you burned the bridge to your old excuses? Because until you do, starting over will always feel like the only option. But when your decisions become non-negotiable, starting over is no longer necessary. You just keep going. Forward, focused, unshakable. Repetition without intention is just motion, not progress. This is another reason why people find themselves stuck in cycles, because they confuse activity with achievement. They stay busy, they read more, plan more, write more, think more. But without focused execution, none of it compounds into anything meaningful. You can read 100 books, but if you don't apply the core lesson with intensity and consistency, your life won't change. You can set 1,000 goals, but if you don't move deliberately in one direction, those goals just become a list of wishes. The truth is, effort without clarity becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion is what causes people to pause, burn out, or restart from scratch again and again. The mistake isn't that you worked hard. The mistake is that you didn't work smart. You didn't pause to ask, what is actually moving the needle? What actions are truly building momentum? What choices are aligned with where I'm going, and which are just distractions dressed up as productivity? When you fail to track your real progress, you start doubting your path. And that doubt leads to hesitation. Then the hesitation becomes disengagement. And then the disengagement becomes another reason to start over. But it was never a lack of ability. It was a lack of direction. That's why deliberate action matters more than scattered motion. You don't need to do everything. You need to do what matters with obsession. Stop measuring your day by how much you did. Start measuring it by how much you moved forward. One decision made with clarity can do more for your future than 10 tasks done without intention. This shift in perspective changes everything. You stop seeking momentum from motivation and instead build it through precision. You stop relying on random action and replace it with structured, measurable movement toward your target. This is the truth most avoid, because it's easier to be busy than it is to be strategic. But busyness won't break the cycle. Clarity will. Focus will. Ruthless prioritization will. You don't need another plan. You need a process that forces results. You need to stop hoping progress will happen and start engineering it daily with no excuses and no detours. Because when your actions finally match your ambitions, when every step becomes intentional, the idea of starting over becomes irrelevant. You're not restarting, you're refining, you're not lost, you're locked in. That's the level where change becomes permanent. Discipline is not built in public, it's built in the private moments no one sees. And this is the part most people underestimate. They want change to feel dramatic, cinematic, even heroic. But real change doesn't come with fanfare. It comes when you get up and do what you said you'd do again and again, when no one is watching, when no one is clapping, and when no one would blame you for quitting. It's in those quiet hours that your future is being written, not in bursts of inspiration, but in sustained repetition. That's where most people lose. They show up strong for a week, maybe a month. But when the motivation fades and the spotlight dims, so does their commitment. You will never rise above the level of your daily habits. It's not about how loud your goals are. It's about how small your actions become when no one is watching. Are you disciplined when it's inconvenient? Are you still focused when progress is invisible? Because that's where the winners separate themselves. Not in results, but in rhythm. Not in hype, but in habits. If your habits aren't designed for consistency, your life will be designed for chaos. You'll keep chasing breakthroughs, but find yourself restarting because your foundation was never strong enough to support the life you claim to want. This is not about being perfect. It's about being anchored. Anchored in routine, or anchored in non-negotiables, anchored in the identity of someone who does not drift just because their emotions shift. Your emotions will lie to you. They will tell you it's too hard, too slow, too uncertain. But habits don't care how you feel. And if you build your life around disciplined habits, you create a version of yourself that moves even when the feelings don't. That's where freedom begins, not in doing what you want when you want, but in becoming the kind of person who does what's necessary no matter what. The reason you've restarted so many times is because you kept depending on emotion to carry you. But emotion is like the wind. It changes direction without warning. Discipline is the anchor. Routine is the structure. Systems are the strategy. If you don't build those into your life, you'll always be starting over, wondering why nothing sticks. But when your habits become your identity, you no longer rely on motivation. You rely on momentum. And momentum doesn't ask how you feel. It just moves forward day after day until results are no longer a possibility. They are a reality. One of the greatest reasons people keep starting over is because they remain emotionally tied to their past failures. They carry shame like a shadow, letting it whisper doubts into every new beginning. They let past mistakes define their self-image and limit their courage. They rehearse their regrets instead of rewriting their story. And as long as you identify with your lowest moment, you will sabotage your future to match it. This is why change feels temporary, because even when your habits shift, your identity hasn't. You're still viewing yourself through the lens of who you were, not who you're becoming. And no amount of action will override the power of an unhealed mindset. You must understand this truth. Failure is not final unless you decide to live there. Every single successful person has a past littered with broken promises, failed attempts, and imperfect progress. The difference is they didn't stay there. They extracted the lesson and discarded the rest. But most people do the opposite. They keep the guilt and ignore the wisdom. They build an identity around I never finish anything or I always fall off track, and then wonder why it keeps becoming true. Your mind is always listening. And if your self-talk reinforces your past, your behavior will follow. It doesn't matter how many times you start again. If you still believe you're the same person who failed, you will unconsciously repeat the pattern. You cannot become your future if you're still loyal to your past. That means you must forgive yourself, not just once, but every time the old voice resurfaces. You must practice speaking as the person you're becoming, not the one you're trying to escape. Start saying things like, I am consistent. I am disciplined. I finish what I start. Not because you've mastered it yet, but because your words create the framework your actions will grow into. You don't speak truth only after it's real. You speak it until it becomes real. That's how you shift your identity. That's how you stop being someone who keeps starting over and start being someone who builds relentlessly, regardless of what happened yesterday. Because ultimately, your power lies in what you choose to believe about yourself. You can either carry your past like a weight, or you can use it as fuel. The past only controls you if you keep feeding it. But the moment you choose to let it go, to stop explaining it, to stop identifying with it, you become free. And when you're finally free, the cycle ends. Not because you've become perfect, but because you've become whole. The truth is, you don't need another reset. You don't need another Monday. You don't need to wait for the right time or a sign or some miracle burst of motivation to get started again. What you need is to decide, once and for all, that this time you finish. That this version of you doesn't pause when it gets hard. That this version doesn't look back to check if the past is catching up. That this version builds no exit strategy because quitting is no longer in the vocabulary. That's the version of you that makes progress permanent. That's the version of you who rewrites the story for good. But that version only emerges when the old one dies, and that death happens when you stop entertaining the same excuses that always lead you back to the beginning. You must understand the pain of discipline is temporary, but the pain of regret, of watching your potential rot while you tell yourself maybe next time, that pain is permanent. It stays with you. It echoes in every opportunity you miss, in every excuse you repeat, in every year that passes without becoming the person you know you were meant to be. You weren't born to repeat patterns. You weren't built to live in loops. You were made for progress, for growth, for movement. And that means the moment you decide you're done starting over is the moment your real life begins. Not because the path gets easier, but because you finally stop running from it. There is power in doing the hard thing one more time, not for show, not for anyone's approval, but because you gave your word to yourself. And that's what this really comes down to, integrity. Keeping the promises you make to yourself. Not just when it's easy, or not just when you're inspired, but especially when nothing around you gives you a reason to keep going. That's the test. And if you pass it, you rise, maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but you rise. And every time you do, you put more distance between the person you were and the person you are becoming. So if you're tired of starting over, don't look outside for a strategy. Look within for a decision. Choose who you want to be. Then back that choice with discipline, desire, and direction so relentless that the old version of you has no room to breathe, no fallback plan, no voice, just silence. And in that silence, something powerful begins to grow, a new identity rooted in resolve. Not a version of you that restarts, but one that finishes no matter what.